guys, we're still going on with the Freelancers Summit 2022, and I'm super excited here to have my brother, my mentor, advisor, investor, Brandon Quinn, who's a product manager at LinkedIn. And, you know, this is super interesting because one of the tools that I use on a daily basis and I had to learn is LinkedIn. You know, it's so underrated, but the connections that you make, business connections and grow your network are just super amazing. But anyways, you know, we'll let Brandon speak more on that. His topic is best practices for borderless collaboration. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you, Tongai, and I'm humbled that you call me a mentor just because you're such a brilliant technical mind. I love working with you. I love being an investor in AfriBlocks and very excited about what you all have in the future. So without further ado, let me go ahead and share my screen here. I have a presentation for everyone I put together. All right, we're just gonna hit play here. All right, so thank you for taking the time to listen to me and hear me out. I'm very excited about borderless collaboration, the future of work, and I really think there's no limits to what we're gonna be able to do together across the globe. I think AfriBlocks is gonna be a huge part of that, and also, you know, considering the continent of Africa being involved in everything that is going to be happening globally, I think Africa will be, you know, the center of emerging technologies and emerging trends, and I'm excited about that. First, let me go ahead and intro myself. Let me just be a little bit more humble than what Tongai had said. So I'm a senior product manager at LinkedIn. I've been at LinkedIn for a little over 2 years. I previously worked on a services marketplace, which is a freelance platform. I'm currently working on trust features, things to build more authentic identity into the ecosystem and making sure that our people who are using LinkedIn as a product is having a trusted experience. Previously, before that, I was at a YC startup. I was a director of product, and we were building various products, but I had a ton of experience on the growth and core product side. And then previous to that, I spent 14 years of my career in various roles at Apple. And I started at Apple through, you know, working mostly sales and marketing roles, and found my way into tech. You know, the capstone of my Apple experience was I spent 3 years in Shanghai building a team. And before that, most of my time in collaboration was spent working with folks in China and India. And so my perspective on distributed teams comes from one of someone who was working in Cupertino, partnering with folks in China, India, and then also having the inverse experience of being someone who is living in China and most of our stakeholders and most of the leadership being in Cupertino, California. And so I have a perspective of being someone who's leading a team distributed, and also one of being of the distributed folks on the team. And so I think the perspective I have here is on both sides. And, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about not only best practices for the people who are distributed, but also for the leaders and people who are leading teams that are distributed across the globe. You can find me on LinkedIn. You know, feel free to hit the follow button there. This is my profile, quick shot here on the right. You can also find me on Twitter at BV Quinn. Both those are my LinkedIn and Twitter handles. So feel free to connect with me there. Looking forward to talking with everyone and anyone who reaches out. I try to get back to every message. Okay, so going on to the next slide here, just to drill down a little bit about my experience in this space. I said I lived in China for 3 years, but looking at it from a zoomed out view, you know, I've led product teams distributed over 7 different countries, as far as 16,000 kilometers away, as well as like 15 hours in time zone differences. I won't say like I'm an expert in anything. There's always space to learn and grow. But, you know, this is one thing that I'm very proud of is, you know, in addition to working in China and India and working with folks from abroad and living there, I've also had the opportunity. I worked with Adela previously at my last startup, where we had engineers distributed through Lagos and Nairobi. And we had the opportunity to make a trip out there and work with those folks in person. So for me, getting the opportunity to visit Nairobi, meet with the engineers and work face to face with them was great. But the bulk of the work that we had done was previously done distributed, and we were remote in everything that we contributed to. So, I have some experience in working with folks across the continent of Africa, understanding how time zones and changes in the workflows impact, your async type of development. And so I have some insights that I think I'll share that will be pretty valuable. I've also worked with folks through Europe, Ukraine previously, and also various UK areas. So, accelerated remote work is taking place right now. It's becoming more than a trend and more of the norm. I think we're getting past the pandemic and we're settling into potentially like a new workflow. And I think, even the term accelerated workflow is becoming a bit antiquated to the times. I think most companies are now thinking remote first. And so this is something that I'm excited about for many reasons, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about this means and how we can start to think of it strategically as a group of people who are contributing to various economies globally. So the first thing I'll say is how you show up digitally is more important than how you show up in person. What that means is, at one point, technology was very influential in like the way business was dressed, right? Like people used to wear business suits or business dresses and show up into the office fully decked out in ties and stuff, very uncomfortable. With technology in Silicon Valley, we saw the emergence of people in like a hoodie or a t-shirt and tennis shoes. And that really became like the trend of style and the way people worked, because what was important, you wanted to be comfortable when you collaborated, and when you were using the best parts of your mind, the more comfortable you were, the better the collaboration was. Well, when we think about this now, the digital way that you represent yourself is the new form of that. It's the new form of the tech hoodie, if you will. It's how you show up on Slack, WhatsApp, and email, and how you engage with people is more important than any business suit or any hoodie that you could wear. It's really about how you're going to show up and represent yourself digitally on these platforms. I talk to more people on Slack on a daily basis than I talk to in person. That's just the nature of where we are right now with this accelerated trend. And we have to really think about our digital footprint. So how we appear, as Tongai was saying, on the LinkedIn ecosystem, our profile pictures, our descriptions of ourselves, how we appear on Twitter, but even further, how do we represent ourselves on Slack, email, WhatsApp, and other forms of communication, Microsoft Teams. The next thing to call out here is your ability to collaborate is more valuable than your location. So it's getting to a point where if I'm here in the United States, I don't care if someone's in Omaha, Nebraska. I don't care if someone's in Texas. I don't care if someone's in Kansas. If you can collaborate and provide value in your collaboration, your location isn't as important to me anymore. It used to be that we had to set up these massive amount of hubs, Silicon Valley and then Austin, Texas, and York. And, you see companies establishing here in the US and Atlanta, but also looking across Pan-Africa, you're looking at people establishing offices in Lagos, Nairobi, Zimbabwe. You're seeing Google just made a recent announcement as early as, I think they first made this announcement back in February 2022, that they're opening offices across Pan-Africa, as well as, Microsoft has established itself there, and Facebook as well. So I think there is a huge value in these companies establishing their presence. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is borderless collaboration between these companies. And it's really important to think about where you want to live personally versus having to do things like relocate yourself to a certain city or area just to be a part of contributing to a certain economy or contributing to a certain type of product. And the next thing here is number 3. We're talking about working asynchronous is fine as long as you can deliver timely and quality work. So what that means is we don't expect you to, be on every single Zoom, answer me right away when I send you a Slack or I send you a WhatsApp. The expectation now is becoming completely fine if I can send a message to someone or I can send an email to someone and within 24 hours I can get a response. So what's really important is the quality of your work, the quality of your response to reduce the amount of times that we have to go back and forth. And I think people are becoming more astute to that and becoming more aware of like, how can you engage and have these type of conversations with people to reduce the back and forth. So this also means that we're eliminating meetings that are unnecessary, having the conversations that are more meaningful, and getting work done that's more valuable. The next thing here that I'll call out that's important about this trend and this remote work life is there's less commuting. So here in the US, there's many of us who have to spend a ton of time. I live in San Francisco and I have to commute down to Silicon Valley for a lot of my work. That usually meant about 4 hours of my day was spent on the road and in a car, which is great to maybe listen to a podcast or listen to some music, but really it's tedious for most people and it wasn't really conducive to being productive. I would get to the office more disgruntled and unfortunately have to spend a lot more time, less time actually working and more time driving. So this means that there's more time with your family, more opportunity to work on passion projects, and there's also more time for people offering services. So what you're seeing now is, people are pursuing, maybe they wanted to be a founder, maybe they had an idea that they thought was really great that they're now pursuing at night, are getting those extra 2 hours back or 4 hours back and contributing to an idea that they always wanted to pursue. Or, maybe you're skilled, maybe you're a skilled developer, maybe you're a skilled freelance writer, whatever it is. Now it's the perfect time to offer services and offer those services in marketplaces like AfriBlocks. Now you're able to contribute, create supplemental income, and help provide more for your earnings. And the last thing here, being remote means that we have to put more effort into building human connection and trust. So it's going to be super important as we push towards having this digital representation that we also bring pieces of ourselves that we normally would share with people in interactions in person into these digital spaces. And so it's very important that we don't lose sight of being human and understand that on the other side of that computer screen, on the other side of that Slack conversation or WhatsApp message is someone who is actually human. And we need to work on fostering and developing those human relationships. All right. So let's go on to some of the best practices here. For distributed work, I think the first thing to think about here is no matter what, if you're in person, distributed, remote, whatever it is, it's very important to have a strong team. The more effective the team is, the higher the impact and the ROI is. So how do you create strong teams and showcase those strong teams when you're distributed? Here goes a few tips for you. The first one is increase the amount of written communication. So previously I worked at Apple, and if you're familiar with Apple as a product and a company, it's very visual in the way that they tell their stories. And so for us, in order to create better collaboration, we really doubled down on written communication. Written communication is key. It creates a repository of information and documentation that maybe a presentation or something visual doesn't quite tell. The other thing about written communication is it's fairly expandable. It can be contributed to by many people with things like Google Docs or Notion and Microsoft Word. They all have collaboration features now that allow people to expand on the content. And you can create these living documents, which are, like a wiki, and a lot less effort at maintaining than it previously has been before. The other thing I'll say about written communication is it's way better to tell someone something they already know than not to tell something that they needed to hear, right? And so That's why it's very important to communicate in Slack channels, WhatsApps, emails. It's very important to have over communication and streamline it versus having someone miss out on something very important that they should have heard or should have known about. And so for me, like one way that we do this is we have like my current team that I work with, we have a weekly update dot. We keep all the very salient, succinct information inside that document. And then we also turn that into an email, also put it into a Slack update. So this is where we're replicating information and making it easier for people to absorb and hear from or learn from. The next thing is to try to eliminate subgroups as much as possible. So it's okay to have multiple Slack channels or multiple group chats going on WhatsApp, but the main thing is that people have access to these information and they can like maybe have just a read-only experience. And so like when you think about that, if you were to create these silos, what ends up happening outside of not sharing the information is that these silos also start to develop side conversations that might be important. They also start to develop their own culture, working culture that's different. So like if you have like a stand-up or engineering pod, if the engineering pod is working together and they're collaborating and they create like this gelling experience that isn't being shared with like a product marketing team or some type of other communication team, what you're doing is you're diverting away from like having one shared product that's being built. So it's best to be able to have access to all sorts of information and people can get insights and updates as soon as possible in these cross-functional groups. The next one here is make time for fun human interaction. So that goes back to the last point that I made in the previous slide. It's very important to get to know the people that you work with on a personal level. And what you are willing to share personally is completely up to you. I think one of my personal favorites here at LinkedIn and what we do when we're building relationships with people is offer an opportunity to share something that's on your LinkedIn profile that or share something on your that is not on your LinkedIn profile. So, we talk about LinkedIn as being your professional identity, but I can consume that information. I can go to LinkedIn and look at it, but someone that isn't necessarily going to be on that LinkedIn profile and that they may not hear like in our day-to-day meetings. So being able to share some information makes me more human, makes me more contextual to the people that I'm interacting with. And it's also a great way to have fun. Another thing that we do at LinkedIn often is when we have our team meetings is before we go into updates, we talk about maybe one personal win that you had the previous week, or if you do monthly updates, maybe it's what was the highlight for you in the past month. So you're sharing some personal information that makes you more relatable to people. The next thing here, number 4, express cultural differences when needed to ensure inclusivity. So I think it's very important to have inclusive teams. It's very important to bring people in to make sure that we're able to collaborate and communicate with each other effectively. But if you don't express those cultural differences, it's going to be hard for people to even maybe recognize them, especially if you're dealing with a social dominant culture. So what that means is if I'm working in the US and we have a few engineers who are based in India working with us, that means like most of the people on the team are thinking US first. And so some of the cultural differences is going to be important to be expressed from the India team to make sure that we're accounting for them. That means like holidays, that means lunch times or any other breaks that are important, maybe for religious reasons. But all these things need to be communicated within the group. And vice versa, if you're a leader, you need to be thinking about this as well to make sure that you have inclusive teams. And then the last thing here is, as a tip, make sure that you have some way to have spontaneous and informal communication. So, one of the things that often is communicated about the struggles of remote work is, we're not brainstorming and we're not being innovative enough. We're not having what they call water cooler or hallway conversations. And it's important to create these type of avenues where people can share random things that help spark innovation and help create better ideas. And so informal communication channels and ways to have spontaneous like meetings is also great way to continue to foster the innovation. All right, going on to the next slide here. Thinking about leadership in thinking about myself and things, anyone who's in a product position or project management position or any type of leadership role where you're kind of playing the quarterback or you're playing the forward or whoever's leading the actual team here, please think about these. But also, if you're not a leader, here are ways to maybe think about how you can manage up and influence those leaders to take some actions to be better at leading remote teams. So the first thing is you want to establish a team by taking these steps. So the first thing is like to understand and get like a core knowledge of the individual differences. So if I'm working with India, I got to learn a little bit about India. If I'm working with China, I have to learn a little bit about China. If I'm working with Nigeria, I need to learn a little bit about Nigeria, right? If I'm working with Zimbabwe, I have to learn a little bit about Zim. I have to know these things in order to have healthy and dynamic conversations with folks. And as a leader, your first step is probably to understand a little bit about the culture. Google is your friend. You can Google almost anything. You learn a lot. There's a ton of things that are interesting out there. One of the perspectives I like to do is to jump into TripAdvisor and understand, like, I like to look at it as like, if I was planning a trip to Zimbabwe, where are some of the places I want to go? Or if I'm planning a trip to Kenya, what are some of the top things I want to see? What are the things you need to be aware of? TripAdvisor is great for getting that baseline cultural understanding of a different place maybe you're not too familiar with. Two, you want to take the differences into account and communicate them. And so, like, if you're learning about workflows and like what times people tend to work, and they work on weekends, or people go to some type of church or a mosque or whatever's going on, but you want to like start to put those differences into the way that you build and in the way that you set up your workflows. You want to make sure that you start to reflect the needs of the team and proactively do so. And then I think the last thing here is like thinking like further ahead is once you get 1 and 2 down, you have this basic foundation. The next thing is like trying to now follow the strength, follow and lean into the strength of your differences, because those differences could actually be the net positive of what's something different that someone isn't able to contribute. So there's a ton of data and insights out there that show diverse teams are actually more effective and contribute or make bigger impact than less diverse teams. And this, one of the reasons why, is because these different perspectives and the differences in the way that people see, experience, and interact with things actually add more value into the way that you build products and build experiences. One of the things that hold true is embracing language challenges. So, I'll first say, like, candidly, I don't speak any other language. I know a little bit of Mandarin, but I don't speak any other language. And so for the most part, a lot of the folks that I've worked with, I've had to be the outlier of someone who doesn't speak more than one language. So most people speak that I've worked with, I spoke English, obviously. And so the first thing to call out here is, like, when you're working with people from different language backgrounds, is you have to pay attention to when someone's potentially struggling with speaking a different language. And so things to pay attention to, and it could be like it's just like, working with someone in London or the UK for me would be a challenge. Hearing their accent and their dialect is just a little different than the way that people in the US speak English. And so, like, understanding those variances are also important, but also just confronting it, right? And so, like, knowing that if people are starting to withdraw from communication or not being as engaging as they could be, that's a sign of a red flag that you don't want your team to be experiencing. If the folks on your team are having side conversations, mostly with people who speak their dialect of English or speak their native language, and they're avoiding English speakers, that's a red flag for me, because I know that means they don't feel trusted and safe to come into my area to speak. Then the other thing is just like code switching. So, like, if someone's unable to show up as their authentic self and they feel like they really have to do a lot of work to augment themselves, I'll try to notice that and take action to make sure that we're creating a safe space. So here are some of the steps to improve right here on the last green bucket here. So first, I think like being empathetic here is like you acknowledge that there's a ton of effort in order to build this gap. And every time that I've worked with someone who isn't a native English speaker, I've always given them kudos for just being able to know 2 languages, because that's one more than me, right? And so, you know, respecting someone's effort and skill is a good step. And then the next thing is figuring out how can you take joint action? How can you create the communication to be effective and not have this language barrier anymore? And that goes back to my point about written communication is a great way to combat some of this. And again, having like personal conversations with people and learning language trends and pattern trends and the way that accents work are also going to be extremely helpful. And the net positive here is going to be, you know, you're going to improve the relationship between yourself and your team. All right, next slide here is thinking about, you know, the team culture of an effective team. So like workflows and organizations are extremely important in establishing this type of team that's going to be distributed and cross-cultural. And so in order as a leader to set this up to make sure that you're going to be building a pretty effective team that's global, is you have to make sure that leadership is willing to, one, support you in all these things. So the first thing here is like equal status. So like as much as possible, everyone should have access to the same systems, the same communication tools, the same documents. As much as possible, you want to remove any barrier that creates this first and second class type citizen in your ecosystem. And so like making sure that everyone has equal status is important. The next thing I'll call out is making sure that you have inclusive communication. Again, going back to the idea of like understanding the cultural differences and making sure that you're have this baseline of understanding of culture is going to be important. And then moving into like understanding like the motivation for the teams that are cross-cultural. So like people who are in either in Zimbabwe or people who are in Shanghai that I was working with, like understanding, you know, what is their motivation to have this global type of collaboration. That you understand some of their intent, and makes you able to work with them better. Obviously, understanding differences is going to be key here, and allowing you to break down the barriers. And then again, going back to that idea of like having a shared open documentation and access to all sorts of tools that the team has. So the more information that's shared, the more the positive experience is going to be, and every interaction is going to be for the distributed team. And so like getting these things in place will ensure that your team will be effective in global distributed collaboration. All right, so last slide here. So just a few takeaways for being an effective global leader. So, you know, again, I don't think there's going to be a company that can avoid being global, you know, by the end of this year. Like someone will have some type of global interaction with either the people they collaborate with or the people that they sell with or sell to. And so it's going to be very important to nail being a global leader. And so just a few last takeaways here. So, you know, you'll know if you're doing well if your team has a shared identity, meaning everyone feels like there's one goal, there's one vision that they're contributing towards. They understand it, they can clearly communicate it. Two, you wrote it any cultural fault lines. And so like those silos and groups of people and pockets of people that are organizing, that instead of them being separate, you start to see commingled groups and people who have information not siloed, kind of glued together or interacting together. Three, people feel safe, right? They're safe. And like, if people feel safe, that means there's going to be trust and there's going to be honesty in the way that you communicate and collaborate. And 4, you've learned something about your team's culture and context. So as a leader, you understand some cultural things about the team. You're also able to learn context and the motivation behind your team and why they're working willing to work for your projects. And a little something about your team personally, right? Being able to have a personal relationship with someone, even if they're distributed, is important. And then the last thing that's extremely important to me is like empathy. Like if the team is grounded in empathy, everyone has empathy for each other. That means if you're on the distributed side, you have empathy for the people that you're working with on the other side, and vice versa. I really believe, and this is something that's on my LinkedIn profile, that the shortest path to solving any problem is empathy. And so that also goes for like the shortest path for building a team is rooted in empathy, and being in a very effective team. So that's my last take, and I hope this was of value to the people who were able to tune in and check this out. Like I said, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, and I'm glad to connect with you and continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Brandon. That was super enlightening, and I do specifically like that last slide, because it talks. I feel like that can be a whole topic on its own, how to become an effective global leader. Thanks a lot, for the presentation and sharing with our audience today. I do appreciate your time, and moving on to the next talk. But thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tonga. I appreciate it.
Sure.